Hi guys, welcome back. We shall now be talking regarding mechanical ventilatory support. I shall first be talking about invasive mechanical ventilation, then about NIV, that is non-invasive ventilation. To understand these waveforms that you can see on the screen at the moment, we need to first look at some baseline parameters. We'll talk about the various types of mode. We'll talk about tidal volume, respiratory rate, FiO2, that is fraction of expired oxygen, and a peak and expiratory pressure. Coming to the first parameter, that is tidal volume, we usually use the 12-12 rule. That is what you would have mostly seen people working with the ventilator in the intensive care unit using for most of the patients. What I mean by 12-12 rule is that the tidal volume, which is also written as VT, should be kept at about 12 ml per kilogram of body weight. When I say that, for a average Indian male, let me say if the weight is 60 kg, then this will work out to 720 ml. And in physiology, you guys would have been taught the tidal volume is 500 ml. So what I want to tell you here is that this kilogram that we're taking here is not the actual weight of the patient, but the lean weight of the patient, that is irrespective of the fat component in the body. Let me say you have two people, one is 5 feet 5 inches and weight is 70 kg, second person is 5 feet 5 inches and the weight is 90 kg. The person who's weighing 90 kg is obviously obese or fat. There's extra fat in the body, but both people with the same height will be having almost the same size of lungs. So size of lung can vary with height. Let me say if I am 6 feet and you are 6 feet 2 inches, or if you compare a boy with a girl, a guy is very tall and a girl is relatively short, then due to differences in height, the size of lungs can vary. But if you're going to compare two people with the same weight and one is relatively fat, the fat component does not mean that he would be having more, I would say, bigger lungs. So please appreciate the fact that here the kilogram that we're talking about is the lean weight of the body. What I mean by the word lean weight of the body, and there are calculators available online by which we can feed in the actual weight of the person, height and weight and other statistics, and then it will tell you the lean weight of the person. Lean weight would mean that the fat component is subtracted from it. 12-12 rule basically means that the tidal volume is kept at 12 ml per kilogram and the respiratory rate of the patient is kept at 12 per minute. Because in 1 minute there would be 60 seconds, so the ventilator will be triggering a breath every 5 seconds. 12 5s would be 60. That would be a backup rate that would be available on the dashpad of the ventilator. You can adjust the respiratory rate. However, I want you to remember that we do not follow the 12-12 rule when it comes to patients of acute respiratory distress syndrome or ARDS. If you've listened to the ARDS lecture or if you're planning to listen to it, you will notice that in the treatment part, I have told you that we keep the tidal volume at the lower value of 6 ml per kilogram of lean body weight. The reason for that is we want to minimize the volume trauma in the patient. You see, ARDS is a condition where there is an inflammation of the alveoli of the patient. If you will inflate it the standard fashion, when you inflate and deflate an inflamed alveoli, there is a possibility of barotrauma and the inflammation part can even worsen. Please appreciate that if you're having a person with Guillain-Barré syndrome or transverse myelitis who had a diaphragmatic paralysis, this person is not having any inflammation in the lungs. So the way you ventilate a person of diaphragmatic paralysis is different from ventilating a person of acute respiratory distress syndrome. And what is the difference? In person with diaphragmatic paralysis, let me say we take something simpler. Let's take up hypokalemia. Let's take up botulinism. Let's take up myasthenic crisis. So any neurological cause where there is a diaphragmatic paralysis in a person, the lungs are not inflamed, the lung parenchyma is normal. So the way I will ventilate that person will be at a tidal volume ranging about 12 ml per kilogram. But in a guy with an inflamed alveoli, secondary to swine flu impaired, bird flu, sepsis, those are important causes for ARDS, multiple blood transfusion, pancreatitis. In those patients, I will be ventilating the patient at 6 ml per kilogram to minimize the volume trauma associated with a ventilation which is done at a relatively higher volume. So tidal volume in physiology is taught to be about 500 ml, but that's a very, I would say, non-specific way of describing it, because as I said, it is dependent on the size of an individual, on the height of an individual, and does not depend exclusively on the weight. And the weight parameter that we consider is the lean body weight of the person, which is to be considered in the calculation. Coming to the respiratory rate, the respiratory rate is important because we want to calculate what is called as the minute volume for the patient. The formula for minute volume is very understandable. It would be tidal volume, that is VT, I'm writing in short, multiplied by the respiratory rate of the patient. Like let me say if my respiratory rate is 12 per minute and the tidal volume is 500 ml, then it will work out to 6 liters. Conditions in which you will deliberately try to increase the respiratory rate and make the person hyperventilate can be conditions like raise ICP. If you will listen to the lecture of raised intracranial pressure, I have described various methods to lower the elevated pressure in the brain. One of them is obviously ventriculostomy, but another method I mentioned is elective hyperventilation, because fast breathing contributes to vasoconstriction of the capillaries responsible for production of CSF. So if the production of CSF will go down, then the pressure in the brain will definitely go down. So one, we deliberately hyperventilate in raise ICP. Another condition where you have to keep the respiratory rate on the higher side could be a person having diabetic ketoacidosis, because these patients, the small breathing, the acidotic hyperventilation is a method of compensation. If we suppress the ventilation drive of a person of diabetic ketoacidosis, then carbon dioxide buildup in the body will occur, one, and secondly, the consumption of protons in the body will also not occur, because protons are combining with bicarbonate to form carbon dioxide, H2CO3. H2CO3 breaks down to produce carbon dioxide. So if you prevent the escape of carbon dioxide, then bicarbonate will not be able to combine with hydrogen ions and not neutralize the impact of acidosis. Hyperventilation is a mechanism of compensation in a person with diabetic ketoacidosis. If you inhibit that, or if you're not able to maintain the higher respiratory rate of the person, he will not be able to clear the acidosis component. When it comes to FiO2, that is fraction of inspired oxygen. Like if he says FiO2 1, that means that you are giving 100% oxygen. If it says FiO2 0.6, that means you are giving 60% oxygen. 0.4 would mean 40% oxygen. You will mix the air oxygen with air in a blender and give it to the patient. It will obviously be humidified oxygen. Now the objective of giving oxygen to the patient is to maintain the oxygen saturation. So the textbook says that whatever FiO2 that you will give to the patient, usually we start with FiO2 of 0.4, increase to 0.5, increase to 0.6, like that. So PaO2 of the person should be on whatever FiO2 you set for the patient. The objective is that PaO2 of the person should be more than 60 millimeter of mercury, and the SpO2 of the patient by pulse oximeter should be more than 90%. If you are able to do that, that means you are bang on target. And last but not the least, a very important concept, PEEP, that is peak and expiratory pressure. What peak and expiratory pressure basically means is that I will always be having some baseline pressure always present in the lung. Whatever inflation or deflation that will be done, that is an inspiratory positive airway pressure or an expiratory positive airway pressure, that pressure will be always above this baseline pressure. Why do I want to do that? Let us assume this is a terminal bronchiole, respiratory bronchioles, and then we have the alveoli. So if you look at the representation, I have shown that some of the alveoli at the moment, due to disease process, you can say, are relatively collapsed. However, when I deploy PEEP, that is peak and expiratory pressure in the patient, this constant pressure will result in the alveoli being relatively inflated. So I'm going to redraw the diagram again of the terminal bronchioles, the respiratory bronchioles, and the alveoli once again. If you compare with the diagram on the left, if you compare these two diagrams, you will notice the fact that in the first one, the alveoli were relatively collapsing and there was an underventilation happening in the lung. But with deployment of PEEP in the patient, the good news is that what I have done now is more surface area of alveoli available for gas exchange. What you read in a medicine book as recruitment of alveoli basically means that more alveoli are not being used, more surface area is available. So PEEP can be used to increase oxygen saturation in the body. It can help you attain the values of SpO2 and PaO2. So you can see there are various parameters by which you can maintain oxygen levels in the body. That could be levels of FiO2 being modulated, or a modulation of peak expiratory end pressure that will cause more alveoli to remain even inflated in the phase of expiration. More surface area being exposed, and therefore a better gas exchange will occur both in the phase of inspiration, expiration, and therefore the oxygen saturation will be relatively better maintained. There is a downside to peak expiratory pressure, however, which I will discuss on the next slide, which is that if the PEEP, which is normally kept as about 5 centimeter of water, in the respiratory panel, in the panel of the ventilator, you will always be able to see the value of PEEP. There are various parameters which I'll describe to you, but the PEEP parameter can always be noticed. Now, if you're keeping a PEEP of 5 centimeters of water, that will ensure recruitment of the alveoli. However, if you overdo this pressure, if you increase the peak and expiratory pressure, then what it does is it puts pressure on the great veins in the chest and thereby reduces the venous return to the right side of the heart. Downgrade of venous return to the heart can affect the blood pressure values. So a higher PEEP is always a disaster in persons with hypotension. If a person is having low blood pressure due to various reasons, then keeping a higher PEEP will be a disaster situation for the patient. Let us take two examples. One is pulmonary embolism. Pulmonary embolism of the massive variety has right ventricular failure and a hypotension. Another example is inferior wall myocardial infarction that also has right ventricular failure, because inferior wall MI is right ventricle, right coronary artery getting blocked. So right ventricle failure, and therefore if right ventricle will not pump blood, the blood coming to left side will also be lesser, so BP is low. In these people, because already blood pressure is lesser, if you will keep the PEEP on the higher side, it will worsen these patients. So PEEP should be kept at about 3 to 5 centimeter of water and is not to be kept on the higher side, in especially persons with hypotension. In fact, you might have to keep it on the lower side in people with hypotension. Example of those conditions could be like pulmonary embolism and inferior wall myocardial infarction in the patient. To see whether you have been able to follow me or not for these parameters, I will just give you two ABG examples so that you can relate to this information provided relatively better before we actually talk about the modes of ventilator. I have patient number A admitted in my hospital whose pH is 7.40, PO2 of the patient is 60 and PCO2 of the patient is 40. I have a patient B in whom the pH is 7.20, the PCO2 of the person is 60 and PO2 is 100. In the first patient, you will notice that pH of the patient is normal. The PCO2 of the patient is also normal. Normal pH, 7.35 to 7.45. PCO2 is 35 to 45. So both are normal, but oxygen is the one that is deficient in the body of this person. So to increase the level of this deficient oxygen in the body, what parameter on the ventilator will I change? I will increase the FiO2 of the patient. If required, I will also cause an increase in the peak and expiratory pressure of the patient. As I explained to you, if I will keep a PEEP on the higher side, it will ensure a better recruitment of the alveoli, and more alveoli means more surface area. So gas exchange will definitely increase and the PO2 values in the body of the person will increase. On the other hand, if you look at the second patient, you will notice that in this person, the problem is not with oxygen. PO2 is perfect, 100 millimeter of mercury. The problem is in PCO2, that is 60 millimeter of mercury, which is elevated. This person is having a respiratory acidosis. Why I'm saying respiratory acidosis? Because carbon dioxide combines with water, forming carbonic acid protons, and protons will cause acidosis. So in a person who's having excess carbon dioxide in the body, how do I kick it out? I can, in this person, change the respiratory rate on the ventilator. The fast breathing will ensure a washout of carbon dioxide. Effectively, I will change the minute volume of the patient. If the minute volume of the person will increase, it will result in carbon dioxide washout, and I will help in recovery of this particular patient. So you can see that if there is hypoxia occurring in the patient, then the ventilator settings to be mainly taken care of are FiO2 and peak and expiratory pressure. On the other hand, if a person is having respiratory acidosis, the parameters that are to be handled in the ventilator are respiratory rate and the minute volume of the patient. So therefore, once you get a hang of this, then we'll be in a better position to discuss regarding the modes which we shall be using to ventilate the patients. We shall now talk about ACMV mode, that is assist controlled mechanical ventilation. I have set the ventilator to a respiratory rate of 12 per minute, that is, it will deliver one breath every 5 seconds. The tidal volume has been set at a limit of 500 ml, and the FiO2 of the patient at the moment is 40%, that is 0.4. So let us now see what the ventilator will do here for the breathing of the patient. This is the breath of the person that is occurring every 5 seconds, and it is being triggered by the ventilator. Every 5 seconds, I have tried to represent the breathing of the patient in the form of a flow chart which shows or a bar chart which shows inspiration, expiration happening in the patient, and the breathing is occurring every 5 seconds. So this is being triggered by the ventilator. This would be called as a ventilator triggered breathing. Now let us assume between the 0 to 5 second period, the patient tries to breathe. In green, I've shown a effort on the part of the patient, that is a patient triggered breath. So the moment the sensor in the ventilator will detect that the person is trying to breathe in between this 5 second interval, it will give a assist to the patient, and it will help in completing the breath of the patient, but to a maximum of only 500 ml. You see on the y-axis, we have kept the volume, and we have defined the volume to be kept at a maximum value of 500 ml in the patient. So I'm just writing this mathematical value once again here, that the tidal volume max is going to be 500 ml, but you can see in the figure that this person was having a patient triggered breath in between. So let us now assume between 5 to 10 second interval there is no effort on the part of the patient. So since the patient did not breathe, no problems, the ventilator will anyway deliver the breath. So the advantage of assist controlled mechanical ventilation is that if a person is not having spontaneous breathing, like a person is having diaphragmatic paralysis, no problem, we can ventilate him at a predetermined rate. Now between 10 to 15 second interval, let me say at the 13th second, there was again an effort of the patient detected. The ventilator will once again take over. It will assist the patient, helping completing the breath to a max value of 500 ml, and then again there would be a normal expiration occurring in a patient. So you can see that in between I have shown patient triggered, PT means a patient triggered breaths, and the remaining breaths of the patient are obviously ventilator triggered breaths, in a sense that they are occurring every 5 seconds in a patient. MCQ wise, I want you to remember that assisted controlled mechanical ventilation or assist controlled mechanical ventilation is the most common mode that is used in invasive mechanical ventilation in the patient. However, there is a disadvantage of this that you are noticing, which is that the breathing rate of the person can be much more than what you actually wanted. Like I wanted him to breathe only every 5 seconds, but in between, because of the spontaneous breathing effort on the part of the person, also the ventilator was kicking in and was assisting the person. So the patient will be having hyperventilation. In fact, this is the main MCQ because of which I've gone into the discussion, because when you will read the table in Harrison for the various modalities of ventilation, in all modalities it is written hypoventilation as a side effect. That is mainly because of the asynchrony between the patient and the ventilator. It is only with assisted controlled mechanical ventilation that hyperventilation can be occurring in the person as a side effect. That is because the ventilator is assisted the patient in breathing. At the moment, my objective is to maintain oxygen saturation. So if the person will deliver a breath, we will assist him so that we can maintain a better oxygen saturation. The price that we have to pay for this is a carbon dioxide washout, which causes respiratory alkalosis in a patient. So that was again a question. Instead of writing hypo and hyperventilation, he said what derangement can be seen with assisted controlled mechanical ventilation. It is respiratory alkalosis. Why respiratory alkalosis is dangerous is because of the fact that it can result in development of hypocalcemia. Why it causes hypocalcemia? For that you will have to go through the electrolytes discussion that I have taken in the kidney section. There I've described that metabolic alkalosis and respiratory alkalosis both can trigger tetany. Respiratory alkalosis can contribute to tetany, so therefore there can also be a chance of development of laryngospasm in the patient. Laryngospasm can trigger a hypoxia, and because of this hypoxia there can even be development of seizures in the patient. So do not be surprised if in a MCQ of ACMV mode he talks about a side effect in the form of seizures and myoclonus in the patient. Why it is written seizures, why it is written myoclonus is secondary to tetany occurring in a person, which is in turn secondary to respiratory alkalosis, because today is not a discussion related to electrolytes. So I want you to remember for this particular topic that the main impact or the side effect of this is a carbon dioxide washout triggering a hypocalcemia, and that can even trigger development of seizure and myoclonus in a patient. Now let us see how ACMV mode is different from SIMV or a synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation. So in this curve I am representing synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation occurring in a patient. I have shown that I programmed the ventilator again in a similar fashion, that it is supposed to deliver a breath to the patient every 5 seconds. So this is the inspiratory and the expiratory effort on the part of the person in the form of these bar charts that are drawn before you, and every 5 seconds a breath is being delivered in the patient. So I've just put a timeline here of 0, 5, 10, 15. That is just to highlight that the breathing of this person has been programmed to be at, let me say, 12 per minute. Now in between, if the ventilator will detect that the person is breathing, it will let the person breathe. It will let the person breathe, but the effort will not be assisted. So there's a possibility that the person may not reach the tidal volume of 500 ml. So you can see that we are calling it synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation, in a sense that in this person there was a patient triggered breath in the person, but the ventilator did not support the person at this particular point of time. So the highlight of this ventilation strategy is no assist is provided, unlike the previous ventilation modality where the assist was provided to the patient. The main advantage of this ventilator strategy is that it is used to support, or it is used to wean off the patient of the ventilators. So it's like a support mechanism. It's like weaning of the patient of the ventilator. I have once again shown in the person a weak respiratory effort. The ventilator detected the weak respiratory effort. It did not assist the person in ventilation. It let the person breathe on his own. But obviously, because the amount of breath going here will be relatively lesser, so it will not contribute much to the minute volume of the patient. And anyway, I have a backup. The backup is every 5 seconds the breath is being provided. So in SIMV, we have given a assurance of a guaranteed minute volume to the patient. Like we have these guaranteed plans offered by various banks. SIMV is like a guaranteed plan that this much ventilation you will get, and the additional bonus is whatever you can take by yourself. Now suppose the person is trying to breathe at the time when the ventilator is also trying to help the person breathe in. I want you to listen to this with care. If the person will try to breathe at the time when the ventilator is also trying to make the person breathe, like at a 10-second interval, then the ventilator's drive will be inhibited. Now that is a disadvantage, because if the ventilator drive will be inhibited, then this particular assured guaranteed breath will not be provided to the patient. Let's do this again. I said the person is trying to breathe. The green represents the effort on the part of the person. The patient's breathing effort occurred at the same time when the ventilator was also trying to give breath to the person. This will result in inhibition of the ventilator mode, because of which the ventilator assured guaranteed breathing will not occur, and therefore if this breathing part is removed from the minute volume, then the total minute volume will be reduced. So the side effect of SIMV mode can be hypoventilation. I would like to reiterate my statement that with all ventilator modalities, when you read in the table, it will be written hypoventilation. Hypoventilation is a possible side effect. Only one will be having a hyperventilation as a side effect, that is ACMV mode. Let me just write down the full form here. That is SIMV, that is synchronized. We are letting the person also exercise his chest muscles, and the ventilator is also providing some backup support, so the load on the muscles of the chest will become relatively lesser. So it's like making him practice before he does a proper breathing. So we call it synchronized, intermittent, mandatory ventilation. You can go through the English word here. Mandatory means that, like I was saying, that we are providing a guaranteed minute volume to the person, that okay, like a ICICI bank guaranteed plan, this much you will get, and additional if you can get, well, great. The side effect of this is hypoventilation. As I said, the ventilator effort can be inhibited if the person's breath will occur at the same time when the ventilator breath is occurring. So do not use if the person is having tachypnea. If the person is already having very fast breathing, like let me say due to pneumonia or due to any other lung insult, then in the setting of tachypnea, the problem will be that the coordination between the ventilator and the person will not occur. So asynchrony, that is lack of coordination between the ventilator and the person, can also result in, as I said, hypoventilation in a patient. So the highlight which you will read in the MCQs will be these terms: asynchrony and hypoventilation are side effects which are seen with synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation, whereas in the previous case there was no asynchrony. If you look at this representation, when the patient was trying to breathe here, the ventilator provided additional breath to the patient. The backup breath will anyway be there in the person, and this time if the person's breath tries to coincide when the ventilator is trying to provide a breath, the system is like that the ventilator effort will not be negated. The ventilator effort will still occur. So in this case, there will always be a backup guaranteed plan again. But if you are trying to breathe in between, additional bonus is being provided to the person. The additional bonus is in the form of a full breath of the person to a tidal volume of 500 ml, versus in this SIMV mode where there was no assist provided to the person. Based on the explanations that I have provided to you for the ACMV mode and the SIMV mode, we will now look at the waveforms that you will see on the screen of the ventilator when you're standing by the side of the patient. One, you will be able to see the ventilation part where you will set the tidal volume at 500 ml depending on the body weight, as I've explained to you. And if a person is having ARDS, then the tidal volume will be kept on the lower side. You can also see that I have maintained a PEEP of 5 centimeters. So dotted here I have shown is that a baseline PEEP is being generated to keep the alveoli open. And what is this negative spike that is occurring? This is the inspiratory effort of the patient. Every time there is an inspiratory effort of the patient, you are noticing that the ventilator is kicking in and it is helping the person breathe. So in this case, there is a deferrative support being provided by the ventilator when the person is showing a breathing effort. However, you are noticing that there's a flat line here because the patient did not breathe. So ventilator triggered breath. This breath that I am putting as a star mark would be called as a pure ventilator triggered breath. How I know this from the waveform is because there is no negative spike present, because you see when we breathe in the negative pressure, there would be a downward deflection. There's no negative deflection here. So this is a ventilator triggered breath in a person. On the other hand, the remaining breaths that are marked in red are the patient triggered breaths in a person. Then when you move on to the extreme right hand side, you will see I put a double star mark here to highlight that suddenly there's a spike of pressure. Why there's a spike of pressure? Because when the alarm is going off, the problem I did was that I did not set up a upper limit for pressure. I set the pressure limit for ventilation, how much volume will go in, but I did not set up a limit for pressure. Well, when the pressure alarm goes off, what could be the reason? One of the important reasons that could be seen or is usually noticed by you when you are ventilating your patients is a blocked endotracheal tube. So therefore, the sudden spike of pressure will occur because the ventilator will have to apply more force to push the air against the increased resistance. Or it could be a patient of asthma who has deteriorated even further. He's already admitted with a severe acute asthma. Now is going into impending respiratory failure. So the bronchospasm has worsened. So airway resistance will increase. That will result in an increase in the pressure spikings here. So I can just put it like this, that you see, we as doctors, we are not very good at physics. We are very good at biology and chemistry and stuff like that. I'm talking about the PMT days. So these waveforms are usually a nightmare for most of us doctors because they look very alien to us, but they're very simple and very straightforward. Even I would say those lab technicians or those technicians who are working with you with the ventilator, they can even interpret these waveforms because they are routinely seeing this. So it's just a matter that if you start, just stand by the side of a person and you start analyzing these waveforms, it becomes very easy to analyze, and there is no rocket science behind this. I mean, it looks very sophisticated with that beeping sound behind, and so many people then talking to you regarding, oh, ventilator settings are to be done. But then believe me, these waveform analytics are much simpler than what we assume them to be. And when it comes to managing a patient, once a person is on ventilator, things are under your control. The chances of a person surviving when he's on a ventilator, assuming like in India ventilator associated pneumonia is so problematic, assuming the fact that there is no problem of ventilator associated pneumonia in your hospital, that is under check. If a person is on a ventilator and he's having a respiratory failure, you are definitely going to save the patient. On the other hand, due to lack of a ventilator, most of the time in India, because ventilator is short, you will have patients going into type 2 respiratory failure, PCO2 spiking to 60-65 millimeter of mercury, and the person then dies due to carbon dioxide narcosis or due to respiratory failure or due to respiratory muscle fatigue that is occurring in a patient. So let us now learn regarding one more ventilation strategy that is called as pressure support ventilation, and see that how is it different from assist controlled mechanical ventilation. I have set up a basic PEEP for my patient of 5 centimeter of water. This represents the PEEP part. Now what I will do is that whenever the person will try to breathe, so the purple here represents patient's effort, the ventilator will kick in. It will deliver a pressure support here to a max limit. I can keep this limit anything between 20 to 30 centimeter of water. In fact, the recommendations are that the pressure support that you can give max is up to 30 centimeters of water. So you can see that I have given support to the patient to build up the pressure in the airways so that a particular amount of ventilation can take place. This person did not breathe for next 5 seconds or 6 seconds or 10 seconds, but when he did breathe again the ventilator is kicking in and it is giving pressure support. You are noticing the fact that in this case there is no guaranteed ventilation or a backup ventilation that is being provided in the patient. It is only the fact that whenever the person is himself breathing, that you are providing a pressure support to the patient so that you are taking the load off the respiratory muscles. Pressure support ventilation is a method that is used to wean off the patients of the ventilator. So I would like to put it like this: SIMV and pressure support ventilation are methods of weaning off the patient so that you are letting the chest muscles exercise once again, and once they are able to practice, they can take the entire load of the patient. So to get the person on the ventilator we use ACMV, and to get the person off the ventilator we are using a combination of SIMV and pressure support ventilation. Please appreciate that in ACMV mode that I have shown you initially, we were having guaranteed breaths in a person plus obviously the additional support of volume ventilation being provided to the patient. But now in this modality we are simply giving a pressure support to the patient so that a better airway dynamics can be maintained, a better oxygen saturation can be maintained. I would also like you to remember a terminology which is given in the end in the chapter by the name of PCV, that is pressure controlled ventilation. Now for pressure controlled ventilation, he has not described much, but he has just highlighted this fact, which is the main reason why you should know is that pressure controlled ventilation should be used in two scenarios. One, if a person is already having a barotrauma, like he's already a case of pneumothorax and he's on a ventilator, so I would like to set up a limit for pressure because already the lung is already damaged. There's already a pneumothorax occurring in a person. So the limits of pressure have to be set up. Otherwise, you don't want the ventilator to cause further worsening of the pneumothorax component. Another reason for pressure control ventilation is a person who's undergone a cardiothoracic vascular surgery like an open heart surgery. So there's a big scar on the chest of the person. He says that to reduce the shear stress, because when you ventilate a person, when the ventilator will inflate the chest, the inflation movement will put shearing stress on the scar, so the scar can split open. So he says that to reduce the shear stress on the surgical scar which has been created after, let me say, open heart surgery or emergency thoracotomy that was done in a person, we can use a PCV, that is a pressure controlled ventilation. So the learning for us is initiation is ACMV, weaning off is SIMV and a pressure support ventilation. And the word control, as the name suggests, is mainly to limit the further inflation of the lungs to a level where it might cause the worsening of a pre-existing barotrauma in a person, or for that matter of fact a patient of CTVS surgery. The final thing that we've learned on the basis of this discussion is that airway control is of paramount importance in any person having a respiratory failure. There are 4 basic rules of ventilation that I would like you to understand on the basis of the terminologies that have been explained. The first and the foremost is that the tidal volume in patients of ARDS should be kept at about 6 ml per kg. It's a range 6 to 8 cc per kg. The peak plateau pressure or the peak pressure should be set at a limit of about 30 centimeters of water. Otherwise, the barotrauma component can increase. The FiO2 should be started from 0.4 and gradually upgraded. The objective is to maintain a SaO2 of more than 90% in the patient or a PO2 of more than 60. Remember, definition of hypoxia is PO2 less than 60. The PEEP of the patient should be kept in the range of about 5 cm of water. This will help in reducing the venous return also, and will also ensure simultaneously recruitment of the alveoli. So if these 4 things are maintained on a patient, then the chances of survival of a person definitely increases. We will now talk regarding non-invasive ventilation and compare it with CPAP, that is continuous positive airway pressure. The common thing between both of them is that we want to achieve a good oxygen delivery to the patient using a tight fitting face mask. However, there is a fundamental difference between the two that you need to understand, so both the terms are not interchangeable. In non-invasive ventilation, we are generating a positive pressure. This positive pressure will be different in the phase of inspiration and expiration. Like we breathe, we have a different pressure in inspiration, expiration. Similarly here, NIV is an accentuation of the same breathing because we want to reduce the load on the accessory muscles of respiration. So we will be generating a inspiratory positive airway pressure, we will be generating an expiratory positive airway pressure. So definitely there is a positive pressure generated, but the amount of the pressure generated in inspiration and expiration is not the same, it is changing. Whereas when it comes to a continuous positive airway pressure, in continuous positive airway pressure, there is definitely a positive pressure, but it is a constant positive pressure. Both in the phase of inspiration, expiration, the same amount of pressure is maintained. I repeat my statement once again, NIV and CPAP, they do not mean the same. Though they might be written like this in the textbook with a slash, they do not mean the same. In non-invasive ventilation, there is a variation in the pressure in inspiration and expiration, whereas there is a constant positive pressure that is generated in CPAP. In fact, Harrison says that CPAP is not actually a exact form of ventilation, because ventilation is all about variation in pressure, because we were drawing these waveforms. In CPAP, we are not generating a variation of pressure, it is a constant pressure. So he says that CPAP is simply a splinting of the airway. It is just like a method that you are generating force to keep the airway open. Where do you use a CPAP? In pediatrics, we use it in hyaline membrane disease where the lungs are collapsing due to deficiency of surfactant. So by the time the surfactant therapy is given to the baby, we want to keep the lungs open, at least maintain oxygen saturation so that he lives. So to splint the airways, we use CPAP in hyaline membrane disease. Another cause for this is OSA, obstructive sleep apnea. I've described obstructive sleep apnea in a different lecture, but I can just explain the basic concept once again, that in obstructive sleep apnea, when the person is sleeping in REM phase, the tongue tends to fall backward and narrow the airway. So there is going to be narrowing of the airway, there's going to be snoring due to pulsations of the uvula, and there would be an obstruction that will cause a nocturnal awakening of the patient. There would be a nocturnal cortical awakening. So because these people have repeated obstruction of airway, repeated nocturnal awakenings, they never wake up fresh. In fact, these people will say that when I wake up in the morning, I wake up to rather thinking when will I go back to sleep again, because I have never woken up fresh. I just feel sleepy all the time. So for this person where the airway is closing down many times in the night, I want to splint it open. I want it to be open so that at least continuously air goes in, irrespective of the phase of breathing, inspiration or expiration. So OSA is where we use a continuous positive airway pressure, and the usual indication for using a CPAP is more than 15, more than 15 apneic episodes per hour is one of the indications for initiating CPAP treatment in the patient. The newer guidelines say that if a person is having 5 apneic episodes per day, also per hour at nighttime sleep also, and there is concomitant excessive daytime sleepiness, we should start CPAP. You can go through the CPAP lecture for better guidelines on this, but I said that if he asks you to select between 5, 10, 15, 20, and he says how many apneic episodes per hour of sleep is minimum required to initiate CPAP immediately, then the first answer is 15 apneic episodes per hour, though there are other indications also which I have explained. The third indication for CPAP, which is now decreasing with usage, is cardiogenic pulmonary edema, which I can just explain like this before I write down the word cardiogenic pulmonary edema. So let us assume this is the lungs, this is the heart in between, and the poor fellow is failing. So every time the heart will fail, there will be a development of a cardiogenic pulmonary edema occurring in the patient. A bat wing edema is what I'm showing here. So what I'm saying is that if I'm going to attach a CPAP machine to this patient, which is going to send in air on a regular basis, then this air going in the lungs will reduce the pulmonary edema component. Please appreciate that the main treatment for cardiogenic pulmonary edema is to treat the causes. Like we be using drugs like LMNOP, Lasix, morphine, nitrates, oxygen, so that we can treat the cardiogenic pulmonary edema of the person. But one supportive measure that can be used in cardiogenic pulmonary edema is CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure. So there are 3 indications for CPAP that I've explained to you. I'll say them again: hyaline membrane disease, obstructive sleep apnea, and a cardiogenic pulmonary edema. However, non-invasive ventilation is not same as CPAP, because there's a variation in the pressure. There's a variation in the pressure in the phase of inspiration and expiration, and therefore in NIV, let's now see when do you use NIV in your patients. So the uses of non-invasive ventilation are mainly limited to COPD exacerbation. COPD can contribute to respiratory acidosis in a patient. My patient is a big time smoker. His pH is anywhere between 7.25 to 7.35. I know the fact that if he will deteriorate further, I might have to put in an endotracheal tube with the patient and ventilate the patient. The disadvantage of intubating the patient is, one, are chances of development of ventilator-associated pneumonia and local trauma to the airways of the person. So currently, non-invasive ventilation is recommended for patients who are having type 2 respiratory failure, that is a COPD exacerbation with respiratory acidosis. What is the main advantage of a non-invasive ventilation? As the name suggests, non-invasive. The incidence of ventilator-associated pneumonia. Remember, ventilator-associated pneumonia is mainly seen with Pseudomonas, then with Staph aureus, then with Acinetobacter. The number 1 is Pseudomonas. As a MDR cause, multi-drug resistant cause for ventilator-associated pneumonia, the incidence would go down. Second is the local trauma, so the tracheolaryngeal trauma that is associated with intubation of a patient will be significantly minimized if you are using a tight fitting mask with a variable pressure in inspiration and expiration. Non-invasive ventilation can be remembered by you as a pressure support ventilation. Whenever the person is breathing, you are providing some support in inspiration as well as an expiration. So this is described in textbook as PSV, that is a pressure support ventilation without any intubation. Whenever the person is having a respiratory drive, the computer is helping him breathe better so that the load on the muscles of respiration is significantly reduced. The main indication for this is type 2 respiratory failure. How would you know that the person is responding to your treatment? The respiratory rate of the patient will begin to reduce. The usage of accessory muscles, like in type 2 respiratory failure, sternocleidomastoid is working overtime, scalenus group of muscles are working overtime, this flaring of nostrils of the patient. So the accessory muscles of respiration, they will definitely reduce. So monitoring of the person is done in NIV and the load on the muscles will be significantly reduced. This method of ventilation is absolutely contraindicated in people who cannot take care of the airway. So he can write terms like encephalopathy, or I'll just make it simple. People who cannot protect airway cannot be put on non-invasive ventilation. The chances are too high of them aspirating on their own secretions. Similarly, if a person is in cardiorespiratory arrest, either of the two, either a cardiac arrest or a respiratory arrest, then we need an advanced airway. We need to intubate the patient. NIV will not work in that case. So is the case with GI bleeding, because you are using a tight-fitting mask here. When you will vomit blood, there is a possibility of aspiration. So is the case with unstable angina, myocardial infarction, or any other acute coronary syndrome in a patient. Because you're using a face mask, so facial surgery, any kind of facial surgery, reconstruction surgery, or upper airway obstruction in the patient is also a contraindication for using NIV in a patient. Just to summarize the main details, I want you to remember the following aspects. CPAP is a method of ventilation in pediatrics for hyaline membrane disease and internal medicine for obstructive sleep apnea. Speciality of CPAP is it is simply a splint that keeps the airways open, and it is a method of non-invasive ventilation. The second one is NIV, non-invasive ventilation, where a tight-fitting mask is used. Here you will be having variable pressure during inspiration as well as expiration. So some people tend to refer non-invasive ventilation as BiPAP. That is BiPAP, just to explain the variation in pressure versus a constant pressure of CPAP. The usage of this is mainly COPD exacerbation. The person is having respiratory acidosis with a value pH between 7.25 to 3.5. Why not less than 7.25? Because the person's encephalopathy will be so severe. The protons will damage the blood-brain barrier, and the encephalopathy will make the person incapable of handling his airways. So the chances of aspiration definitely increase in the person. In contrast, the methods of invasive ventilation are assisted controlled mechanical ventilation. This is the most common modality of ventilation that is used. One of the side effects of this is, however, hyperventilation. So respiratory alkalosis is a big side effect of this ventilation method. This is the preferred method of initiation of ventilation in a patient. Side effect is respiratory alkalosis and development of even seizures and myoclonus, which is to be remembered. To wean off the patient of the ventilator, two strategies are recommended. One is SIMV and second is the pressure support ventilation. SIMV will have some guaranteed backup ventilation, and the ventilator will not assist the person when the person is trying to initiate his breathing. Pressure support ventilation will, however, assist the patient whenever he breathes. So weaning of the patient off the ventilator is usually for SIMV and a pressure support ventilation. In contrast, pressure control ventilation is recommended for persons who have undergone a cardiothoracic vascular surgery, or for that matter of fact, those people who are already having a pre-existing barotrauma. And the side effect of both of these ventilator strategies is respiratory acidosis, or a buildup of carbon dioxide, or hypoventilation is a side effect of these invasive modalities of ventilation that I have mentioned before you. So for the exam perspective, you need to remember the differences between these ventilator strategies which have been highlighted. I've also tried to draw the waves of the on the ventilator dashboard before you to get you a basic idea of the aspects related to ventilation. And if you get these basic things right, I think you will be able to solve those standard questions which are being asked in your exam for mechanical ventilatory support. Thank you so much for listening.